But we had today the Shadow Minister for Trade come out and say that it was terrible that because of the bad handling of the Chinese arrangement by the government, that coal miners would lose their jobs in the Wollongong area. Now, what's wrong with us buying our coal and us using it for our benefit?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth.
But also, it feels to me, Matt, that again, as Bronwyn just pointed out, this is a very sort of clever way to say, oh, well, no, if coal falls over, it's all because of that evil Morrison who was, annoying the Chinese.
Well, that's right, and that's exactly what the Labor Party wants, so I don't know what they're complaining about. The Deputy Leader of the Labor Party, Richard Marles, said last year he thought it would be a good thing if people stopped buying our coal. And now China's doing that for other reasons than climate change, and so it's exactly what the Labor Party were after. And full credit to Joel for trying to fight the good fight here. But I do take some issue with the figures that he raised, saying that we've cut our emissions by 40% in per capita terms. When you drill down into that, the only reason that has happened is because we've stopped farmers being able to develop their own land. Our actual emissions, if you take out the agricultural sector, if you take out farming, our emissions have stayed the same since 2005. We wouldn't be meeting Kyoto, but for the fact that state governments have all put massive restrictions on farmers just being able to exercise their own property rights. And so it's a bit of a myth to say businesses are all acting. What's happened is we've made farmers bear the burden for our moral preening on the world stage, and there's no real plan to get down to net zero emissions or anything like that. And just on this, Mr Guterres, I mean, what really concerns me, Paul, is let's put aside whether or not we should cut carbon emissions by 10%, 20%, 100% in the next 30 years. He is saying that the major priority for the world is this next year. Well, I know maybe we see it a bit differently here in Australia right now, but right across the world, I think the major challenge is the aggressiveness and assertiveness of a dictatorial communist state which is bullying other countries. That is the biggest issue that the world has to face in the next decade. And to say that climate change is going to be globally dealt with, I mean, how the hell is anyone going to be able to trust China, the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide? How would anyone trust China to sign up and actually implement a global agreement on reducing their carbon emissions when they won't even honour a trade agreement they signed with us 5 years ago? It's absurd. Well, it's not going to happen. So the first thing, even if you want to take action on climate change, the first thing we've got to do is deal with this issue of an increasingly assertive and belligerent Chinese Communist Party.
And get out of the Paris Agreement and start looking after Australian interests and start becoming more self-sufficient.
I also think
cheap power.
One of the things that should be the main focus about 2021 is being able to see the rest of the world, being able to visit the rest of the world, being able to go to a restaurant, being able to dance at a wedding, being able, literally the Australian ballet, and we all know I'm massive fans of the tutu, right? Which is that the Australian ballet can't even touch at the moment, right? Anyway, would that make an image
see you one in one, Paul.
Paul, I do not want to see you on a tutu. But can I just pick up on Matt's point? Yeah, a lot of our gains in emissions reductions have come from cessation of land clearing and changing farming practices. But, Australians have been putting rooftop solar on their roofs like no one could have possibly predicted.
It hasn't done anything.
Our vehicles, our big vehicles, including mining equipment, have pollution controls they never used to have. Our manufacturers are putting more efficient systems in place, largely to save money, to be more efficient, but they're reducing their carbon emissions. We Australians are buying more and more electric cars or hybrid cars. So people are doing these things already. That's the point I was making. Yes. We can't just concentrate on the electricity generation sector. Transport and these other sectors have a big role to play too, and those who invest in them and run them are reducing their emissions.
Joel, you were the agricultural spokesman for the Labor Party, and agriculture is on the hit list.
That was a good one too, Bronwyn.
Well, you also came out and started to side with the Chinese as early as May, Joel. And I might remind you that you had trouble with your friendship with Chinese people when you were Minister for Defence. So don't take the moral high ground here too highly.
Well, Bronwyn, I miss you in the House of Representatives, but I remind you that I did a very generous settlement with a certain newspaper about those Chinese accusations. But I don't walk away from my view that Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison have mismanaged this relationship. and our growers, producers and coal miners and others are now paying a price. And you said, why don't we consume our coal here? About 90% of our coal goes to export markets. We couldn't possibly consume the coal we dig out of the ground, and a lot of it goes to China. And as a result, Madeleine King was right. Right now, as we speak, miners in the Illawarra and in my area, my region, the Hunter Valley, are being told they'll have to stand down over Christmas.
Correct.
Because the stockpiles are too large. The stockpiles are too large because we can't get coal into China, and we can't get coal into China, just like barley and a number of other products, red meat included, because of the way Scott Morrison and Malcolm Turnbull have mismanaged this relationship.
I can't let that go.
And the mismanagement.
Paul.
Don't worry. Matt Bronwyn, then a break because it ain't Channel 2.
Yeah, well, let me tell you. Matt, let me say there is one shipment of coal waiting to be delivered into China, which they could divert to Japan. Japan wants the shipload, and the Chinese won't allow it to happen. Japan is our biggest market for coal, not China. So there is something very, very insidious going on. We have to be prepared to defend ourselves. We have to know that China is aggressive.
Okay. I do have to take a break, but Matt, I promised you a crack, so get in there.
All right, so I just want to take up the point that Joel thinks it's all because of a few comments that Scott Morrison and Malcolm Turnbull said. I mean, even if you do take that view, and I don't, even if you take the view that because Malcolm used some Chinese saying that the Chinese didn't agree with, and because Scott called for a coronavirus inquiry, none of that gets anywhere close to justifying the kind of conduct we've seen by China in response. And in fact, I take the view that at least we know now who we're dealing with. Because if it wasn't the comments that Scott or Malcolm made now, it would be something else, some small slight they'd take in the future. So if that is the way our so-called friend and best trading partner at the moment is going to behave, well, we've got to get out of this relationship as soon as possible, because at some point it's going to go awry. And to sit back and start putting on a black armband and blaming ourselves for this, even if you think the statements were a little bit too direct, that is ridiculous, because the actual action or reaction we've seen from China is completely out of context with the perceived slights that has been imposed, that Joel is alleging. And so we've got to wake up to ourselves. Yeah.